Welcome to Audience First, a podcast for tech marketers looking to break out of the echo chamber to better understand their audience and turn them into loyal customers. Every week, Dani Woolf has brutally honest conversations with busy tech buyers about what really motivates them, the things they hate that vendors do, and what you can do about it. Get access to practical information on how to build authentic relationships with your audience. Listen to and talk with your buyers, and apply real customer insights to your strategies and tactics. You owe it to the world to unmute your mic. Are you ready?
All right, welcome to another episode of Audience First. I am stoked today because I have David Cross on, and I've been stalking David for a good 4 or 5 years, and we finally got him on the podcast. So thanks for coming on the show, David.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. Been pretty excited when you reached out and things like that. So I'd love to join because I think you have kind of one of the more kind of organic and kind of really lively kind of conversations, and those are the best type, right?
Yeah, they are. And you were mentioning before we hit the big red button that you like those kinds of podcasts that are more organic. Why is that? What is it about the more organic, fluid conversation that resonates more with you?
Well, in some ways, I want them to be real, right? So I'm a podcast listener. I listen to a lot, because I'm a runner and walking, things like that. So I like to listen to podcasts and get something out of it. And if they're scripted and just blah, 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 like why you're just gonna, they're boring, right? And so you want it to be original, dynamic, have some fun. And then that's why people will return to them.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I feel like when they're too scripted, it's like way too rigid and you don't see the authentic self or the
Agreed.
the behavior or experience. You don't feel the experiences of the guests. So yeah, this is what it's about on Audience First. We're super organic. Now I remember I reached out to you on LinkedIn and I asked, hey, do you want to come on the pod? Um, I do want to ask, and I'm going to start asking all my guests this, like, why did you say yes?
Good question. I think one of the things is that I'm kind of experienced with doing the podcast, and so I'm not afraid of that. Afraid of them, things like that. So I'm more, comfortable with it. But to say that no one ever gets nervous, well, that's a bunch of BS, right? But because I love podcasts, right? And it's sometimes if you can kind of offer something meaningful, right, then you're kind of returning to the community. And so I want there to be more great podcasts because if they're not good ones, then I get bored. I have nothing to listen to.
Yeah, yeah. Totally agree. All right, let's kick it off. David, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do? Who are you? What do you do? And why the hell do you do it?
Well, boy, you want the long story or the short story? So I'll do a little bit of both, right? Certainly, I'm currently the senior vice president and a CISO for the Oracle SaaS Cloud, right? Been here for about 5.5 years. I spent a long time, like 17 years at Microsoft and a couple years at Google, and all working in cybersecurity. So really passionate about cybersecurity. I'm passionate about customers, right? How we help people in that space. But really, is how did I get into this? Is that I'm a veteran, right? I served, many years ago. It seems like, yeah, the classic story, like, yeah, 30 years ago when I was in the army, I did this. Well, it seems like I'm telling that story now, but the truth is, when I came back after our last deployment on the Eisenhower, and I bought this book called Applied Cryptography by Bruce Schneier, right, from the Naval Exchange in Naples, Italy. And I was on watch in the ready room, the squadron, and the commanding officer was like, "Oh, we want you to sign up again, do a tour, shorter." I'm like, "No, I want to go to graduate school and I want to get involved in this, right, cryptography." Because my squadron, we were electronic warfare and jamming, and I said, "There's something into this," and I couldn't turn away. That's where it all started.
I love it. I just I just recorded an episode talking about the insights that I distilled from the last 55 episodes I've done. And this question that I always kick off with, why do you do what you do? This theme emerges. It's I'm passionate to help people. I love the complex challenge. Like that's across the board why people come into this industry and stay here.
I think another element, I think, is what a lot of people for security is that I think jobs and other things like if you after a little while you get good at it and you start turning the crank, it gets really boring. The really cool thing,
Mhm.
which is also some of the challenge, is security is always dynamic. It's always challenging, right? It's always changing, right? It's moving quickly. And so there's never a boring time, right? Because it's always evolving, right? And that always keeps you interested. And I think it's an important part, certainly for me, is that if something is just does not change in one day, then boy, I'm bored and I'm looking for the next thing to do.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, I wanna drill down into a question which I absolutely love. Um, our space is full of issues, right, that we need to improve. But what do you hate most about this industry?
Let's see. What do I hate the most? I think that um, well, sometimes you could say it's like politics, right? People get all riled up and have sometimes don't make great decisions because I could say they're maybe they don't read enough and they're not educated, and so they get kind of skewed and biased in the wrong directions. In some ways, I could say insecurity is that the more you help people to understand, right, and understand the impact of things, to understand, what the threats are, to understand what could be the results of like not patching, then it's much
Mhm.
easier for them to make decisions because they've had a little bit of education. And I think sometimes when people just look at things as a black box, it's either, oh, usability versus security, then people just get biased and make the wrong decision sometimes.
What's your right now, one bleeding neck challenge in your role?
What would be the number one challenge, right? Um, I think that it's an element, I think, is that, things being fast paced, dynamic, changing, and there's always a load, right? But does everybody, keep up to date, right? If it's always changing and, programming languages are changing, techniques are changing, attacks are changing, right? So how do you balance that, right? And in some ways, I think about like I try to do myself and guide others is like you got to structure that part of your role is education, right? In a
Mhm.
constant way, in planning that and structuring that. That's very important because it's so easy the moment saying, oh, you stop learning, you stop, kind of educating yourself, right? That means, oh, you're now starting to decline, right? And that's one of the challenges.
Well, why do you think, and I wanna focus now 'cause
Mhm.
you mentioned that you're part of cloud SaaS, right?
Correct.
I wanna focus on the cloud market
Sure.
because first of all, I have a lot of clients who are cloud security
Mhm.
products, and I mean, it's all about cloud now. Everyone's talking
Yep.
about cloud, right? But the challenges that I see is that it's such a crowded and a confused market. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I think one thing is I talked about the RSA conference earlier this year, and I said, hey, it's not about if you're moving to cloud, it's when you're moving to cloud. So the reality is,
Mhm.
everybody is saying cloud is here. It's not, right, you're all going there, right? That's one element. It's kind of like saying, oh, social media is going to go away. Nope, it's here forever, everybody. Now, I think that the element is that, which is, I think, one of the challenges, which I also try to talk about, is people. It's not apples to apples, right? It's saying what you do for security, what you do for compliance, what you do for operations change, and I think that's one of the challenges. Someone that let's say you're an application owner for 25 years, right, on premise, and now your application moves to the cloud, you need a lot of things change, and a lot of things, some of the challenges is that people don't understand and aren't educated on all of those changes and how to operate it, how to secure it, right? Because they're different, and I think that's one of the gaps and deltas that we all need to kind of serve or help with.
Okay, that's interesting because, it takes me to my next question, which is, um, see, this is the thread that I'm pulling on that I talked
Mhm.
to you about. I
Yep.
had that initial line of question, but no, now we're gonna go in a
Yeah.
completely different direction. How would you describe the level of, maturity among, professionals within the cloud security market, and specifically, like, practitioners, the buyers, in the current market right now?
Oh, I think it's very mixed, right? And I think it depends on the verticals, if you will. So sometimes, let's say, historically, financial services is sometimes the last to move, right? Because of regulations and other reasons. So I think there's others that they move very
Wow.
quickly, they're onboarded, and others take longer, especially, let's say, public sector sometimes, right? Or military, right? Let's say FedRAMP, think of government. How fast does the government move? I think doesn't
Mhm.
matter. Name your favorite government. It doesn't move too quickly, right? And so the people that are there are, if they're not moving quickly there, are they educated in the cloud? Do they know how it works? Do they how to operate it? Do they have best practices? Maybe not. And I think that's one of the things we're running into.
How do you suggest you close kind of that gap to education?
Well, I could say, various conferences and other things. And what am I meeting customers? What's my number one takeaway? Documentation, right? The thing that everyone
Yeah.
hates. We need more documentation. We need more best practices. We need more, kind of, I think the greater ecosystem help, right? Is sometimes I'll give an example is you may choose a vendor and it's great. It's you're moving to the cloud, but sometimes you may just need assistance, right? Sometimes, implementation of a cloud application. If you don't have the skills, maybe you need a vendor or partner to help you with that. And that's okay, right? And how do we continue to, kind of build that ecosystem?
Hmm. Speaking of vendors or partners, um, who I'm curious to know who are the decision makers when it comes to cloud security within organizations,
Mm.
right? Are there specific roles or departments that hold more influence in making cloud security related decisions?
Well, I think it's a really great question. I think of a lot of things is that sometimes you could say, companies that the CISO, right, is the decision maker. But often I like to think about it's about partnership, right? I'll give you a couple of good
Mhm.
examples, which, a simple one. Let's say you want to look at data security, right? And data in the cloud. Is it just the CISO's decision, or no? It's also involved who owns storage, right? For your organization. And it's like a partnership. Also, let's
Mhm.
say we can go the classic example. Let's say CISO, yes, network security, very, very important. But are you not going to involve the head of networking or the your networking devices as part of that decision making? It's unthinkable. It's got to be a partnership. And so
Yeah,
then,
100%.
let's go into the future. Dana, I know you've heard of maybe AI, right? So everybody's talked about it. Now, it's like, okay, a CISO is going to control all of AI. No, it needs to be a partnership with the business owners, the application developers, and things working security in the engineering and business owners and application owners together, right? As a partnership. It's not just single owners.
So a common theme that emerges in a lot of the discussions I have, not just on the podcast, but in general webinars I'm hearing and listening into offline conversations, is that there's not just a gap between the vendor and buyer partnership, but partnerships in cross department.
Yes.
How do we solve for that problem, in your opinion?
Oh, one of the things I try to do, and it's certainly I could think of, a time that this was, I think, one of the teammate village, kind of
Hmm.
communities getting together. And I think Kobe, he was at Walmart at the time talking about, hey, let's talk about examples of incidents. It's kind of like, is it just security handles things, or is how you work together with operations? And you build partnerships, you build standards, you build playbooks together, right? Think of I like NFL football, right? Is it just the offense or is it just the defense? No, you have to have playbooks of them working together and having a plan together. And so I think that an element here is like one of the things that we try to do is you're thinking about another example is patching, right? Is it security? Is it a fight? Is like operations? No, we're not patching. It's downtime or security. Yes, you're patching because it's important. No, you build what I call standards, right? You build a set of standards. I know people don't like that term sometimes, but it's like a standard saying, hey, here's the criteria. Here's our algorithm, right? Is this something that's remotely exploitable? Has it been weaponized, right? Is there threat intelligence about it, right? Now, so you set these things together, as we're engineers, you make it really quantitative and you say, okay, we agreed on the standard. It makes it easy to make decisions, right? And I think that's what it's all about.
Are there specific standards that you
Mm,
follow that are already created? Like, I don't know. I'm not going to throw them out there
mm,
because I may
yeah.
assume the wrong ones. But when I hear standards, I think of some specifically.
Yeah, sometimes I'll say there could be a mixed story, right? I can go my old school days in ITF and things like that, and they've got things like GDPR, but
Mhm.
in some ways, though, I think let's talk about even though we're in a global world, it's not just about the US, but like, NIST, right? NIST and, SP, 853, other things like that. NIST sometimes, I think in the grand thing, does set kind of a benchmark, for us to start from, right? And even though it may not be perfect, I think that's where a lot of people start from, and I think that's okay, right? But I think that my pet peeve is sometimes we get every country in the world wants to create a new standard, You're not going to say, I'm getting nervous. Like, okay, every country in the world is going to have an AI standard, right? Go back to the old school days of the EU digital signature laws, right? It's like every country is going to have their own, digital signature laws. Like it became so complex and so different. Everyone's like, well, no one's going to support it, right? So that's things we have to watch out, especially when they're coming into the world of AI and security.
AI and security. Do I want to go down that rabbit hole or not?
Yeah.
Or not? I don't know. I mean, what? Let's just quickly
Sure.
before we go on to this next question, which kind of is a nice segue, but I do want to divert a little bit. What are your initial thoughts or challenges, or not challenges, or frustrations or fears? I don't know, concerns about AI as it applies to security.
Well, I don't know, if you really want to talk about, hey, is AI going to take over the world or not? Right. But it's like, I have watched all the Terminator movies, so I'll leave it at that. So anyways, it's kind of like, I know one of your common guests on the show, Chris Roberts, we were at Black Hat Mia and we were all talking as we were taking a drive out to the edge of the world. Right. And, talking about this space. It is interesting that one is, how many companies are they involving security from the start or not, right? Or let's say an example today, a company is taking on a new technology, you're building new technology, security development lifecycle is part of it, right? You do your threat modeling, your analysis, and looking at that from the very start. It's part of the motion. You don't release anything unless you do that. Yet at the same time, I think the fear that we're starting to see a little bit is people are like, AI is number one, go really fast, forget all the rules, drive, get in the Ferrari and drive. And like, oh, be careful what you're wishing for here, right? Because the reason we have a security development life cycle in those processes is to help avoid the things later, the crashes, the incidents, right? Going off the rails. So that's one thing we're trying to do, is that it's not about slowing anything down and being anti-competitive, but like we have these things in place. And that's one thing we really have to think about.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, that's a topic we can drill down
Mm.
to at some point. If you're open to coming on again, we could always dig into that. But I do want to go back to the cloud market, because I know that again, this is a hot market, a lot of players in this market, and I do want to uh, understand some viewpoints that of yours that come from some of the people that I know work in cloud security vendors. So some of the challenges that they're experiencing, okay, are going up against some of the bigger players like Wiz and Orca, okay, who are at each other's throats too, right? But those are the like all-in-one solutions, right? But there are a lot of other vendors who have more specialty products. They can complement different kinds of domains in security, but they also touch within the cloud security market. But they can't necessarily like go up against Orca and Wiz because one, they have a huge brand presence, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of clout, they have a lot of customers. So how would you let's see how I can uh articulate this question, because I'm trying to change it from the unique use case. So um can you share any insights that you have or feedback you have or have received from other practitioners regarding the preference for all-in-one solutions versus kind of more specialty tools when it comes to securing cloud environments?
Yeah, Dana, this is a great question, and certainly I'll give you my years of experience on this one. Is um, it depends on the size of the organization, right? I'll give you an example. Like say the very very large enterprises, right, or cloud providers themselves. Sometimes is that they have lots and lots of developers, right? And so and often they really need and want best of breed verticals, right? And at the same time, because they for their specific environment, they need the best of breed that's specific to the context of their graph, their environment, right? But then you're like, well, but then how does this work well with the other verticals? You have endpoint protection, endpoint management, and scanning, vulnerability management, and on and on and on. But they have lots of developers. They can do the integration between them, right? They have the capabilities, they have the resources to do that, and it makes sense. Because sometimes I think the reality is that people says a suite, like I'm going to take the suite, the entire portfolio that has the SIEM, endpoint protection, endpoint management, everything together, but only one or two may be best of breed in your environment. The other ones may be mediocre at best. That doesn't make sense, right? Um, the other element is you think about a large enterprise is said that oh, I'm going to replace everything. I'm going to replace my my endpoint protection, endpoint management, all my scanners all at once for a suite. That's almost impossible to think about logistically. Now,
Mhm.
now, now at the same time, if we go to say, I call it a small medium business, but when I'm not saying, oh, small 20-person companies, but like saying medium to large businesses, 1,000 employees, it may make sense and have it, be much, much better to have the suite, the entire portfolio in their environment because they're smaller, right? They don't have 10,000 or 50,000, servers, right? They don't need all the specialty, capabilities. And for them they also may have the developers and the capability to do all the integration. And that suite may make the most sense, right? So I think it all depends on the size and the resource in your company, and how they matched, right?
Can you take me through some of the key factors that make and let's split it like the all-in-one solution more appealing to security compared to the specialty tools?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of them. I think you certainly everyone's favorite. Microsoft has got the suite of everything, doesn't it? Right? You got Microsoft, but you're seeing kind of emerging now in the whole industry. CrowdStrike, Qualys, Tanium would like to be in that suite. Be there as well. And I would say Wiz is emerging, right? Wiz has really kind of took over that, leading the innovation, in the overall scanning and posture management. But kind of like, well, can they do endpoint protection? Can they also do, the some of the greater, space? Do I want to get in the SIEM space? And so it's kind of like expanding that portfolio because once you reach a certain point, right, in the industry, you want to expand, right? You got to go horizontal in adding adjacent, kind of capabilities. So I think in every environment, it's going to be slightly different, right? In what you may need. I think I'll give you one good example is that let's say you're a cloud application provider, right? And what are you worried about from endpoint protection? Are you worried about, Windows-based laptop, Windows-based, attacks and things? No, your endpoint protection is mainly, Linux and open source, right? Your needs there are wildly different than saying you've
Mhm.
got 100 users, power users, or knowledge workers running on Windows machines that are getting phished all the time. So sometimes you got to look at very big differences there.
What are some of the questions that you ask vendors with regards to those specific use cases?
Well, I think it's certainly, being a large, application provider certainly is we're always going to talk about price, of course, but we'll put that one aside. Let's let's talk about scale. Let's talk about performance, right? We're not talking about hundreds, we're talking about 10,000s, right? We're taking hundreds of thousands, right? It's about scale. It's about performance in massive ways. But the other one I think that many people don't realize is, we are a technology and development company. Is that we care about what I call flexible integration, or so. Does it have an SDK, a software development kit, right? Can we customize it? Can we build against it, right? What are the APIs, right? Because we may not want to use that UX console, right? We may want to build our own tools and APIs. And that's very, very important, especially in large custom environments.
Wow, that's super compelling. What else kind of gets you over the bridge to saying, okay, well, let's further the discussion, maybe go into like a POV and say, yeah, okay, let's purchase a solution.
Well, an element is like is the integration in the environment, right, and things like
Yep.
that. And I think one of the challenges I'll say I think it's not just for companies like ourselves, but let's say for lots of companies is uh, a lot of products and a lot of products and solutions are going to a SaaS model, right? That
Hmm.
they're not going to just be on premise; they're going to be part of a SaaS model. But the real question, which the guidance I like to give lots of startups as well, is that of what cloud do you run into? You should be able to run in every cloud, and you should be able to run in the customer's tenancy or subscription in that cloud, right? There's always the fear. We certainly, I think, let's go back to the examples of European customers. Do they want their services running in a cloud in the United States? No, the Europeans only want it running in Europe, right?
Hmm.
They want it running in their tenancy. They don't want it running in a US based cloud that's controlled and could be I'm not saying could, but could be um, get inquiries, from a U.S. government that they can't be told about, right? So
Hmm.
sometimes I think it's a very important very important point. I like to advise all startups and companies is that you need to be running in everybody's cloud in a customer's tenancy, and that I think is a big part of it. Because on-premise is not realistic anymore. Everyone's moving to the cloud, but it's saying, hey, I'm in cloud A and you only run in cloud B, my competitor, I'm not going to use you.
Do you think that's a unique differentiator, or is that table stakes?
I think currently it's a differentiator, but it will become table stakes, right? Over time.
Why will it become table stakes over time?
Because I think the fear is that more and more, as more and more companies move to the cloud and regulatory, sovereignty, other regions, reasons they have to have this. I think it's going to be just like encryption. So we go back,
Mhm.
10 years ago? Oh, yes, I'm going to get third party additional encryption and pay for it for my cloud storage. Nowadays, if someone's like, yeah, we're going to charge you for encryption of your storage, you'll laugh at them, right? It's a commodity, right? And I think we're going to see this sovereignty element, quite a bit. That's the one thing is, I don't, not promote, my company, but one of the things that we're doing with our sovereignty is like we have what we call our dedicated, region, cloud capabilities. Hey, you can have this cloud in any country in that region, in a very dynamic way, because the demand is there. That
Mhm.
because of global tendency, friction and other things, countries don't want their data going outside of their own country, and they can't build. Some countries are actually kind of small. Some of the European countries, right? They're just too small to build $1 billion data center. There's not $1 billion of
Mhm.
cloud business there.
I wanna go back to, some of the features that you talked about, which are critical. Apart from API and integrations and that kinda stuff, are there any specific features or capabilities that you believe, would differentiate and I wanna again, I'm gonna split this into 2, like the all-in-one solutions, the
Yeah.
suites versus the more niche products.
The I think a big part of it is even though if you have a suite, right, it's kind of like the integration, with other things, right? Is I'll give an example like of uh, uh, you get a solution and you're scanning things like, well, if you don't connect to Jira, well, oh, you're useless, right? Those type of things. And I think this is where a lot of the startup community is kind of helping there. Things like Simplicity or Jupiter One, asset management is like building those connections, even though you don't have everything, but how you can connect to others. And sometimes this is where other technologies is needed and helpful there. Um, let's see what else I would say. A big element is also how it can tie into, I think, your audit and compliance. It's really hard to believe anymore that saying that anybody is going to run a business and not have any audits or compliance requirements. And how does those tie into audit and compliance, systems and services? Because you can't do it manually anymore. You can't hire someone from the big five consulting at $500 an hour and actually have a business, right? So it's all got to be automated.
What are when you think about solutions or cloud security providers that you adopt before you actually purchase them, what are some of the constraints or barriers that you go through to buying?
I think an element is, I think for many is, I don't want to get into the rat hole of, third party risk management, vendor management, things like that. But really, you have to look at is, what are their policies? What are they doing from, open source perspective? What are, does their history of vulnerabilities and other things look at, right? Is that, if something becomes a black box, it's like, is that of what are you using, what is your licensing, what open source you're using, how do you do patching, right? What's your vulnerability history? You want to look at those type of things because you want to know, am I going to put something in place that is a liability, right? But so I think there's some things that jump to mind immediately. Another element is if you look at small companies, right? You say, hey, they're very, very small, 20-person company. It's like, are you going to bet, a mission critical product or service on something where a 20-person company is like, do they have source escrow? What's their liability insurance and other things like that? A lot of the basic things.
I know we touched on by the way, we're breezing through this. This is such a good
Sure.
conversation. I love everything that you're unwrapping here. Um, we touched on some of the challenges in the market and some of your challenges, but what we didn't touch on is what your ultimate goal is
I think the ultimate
in your
goal,
role.
I think is one thing is I say I may have hinted at slightly is that there's always going to be competition, right, across companies. There's always going to be competition between countries in the world, right? At the same time, we all have common enemies as well, right? And one of the things I think about overall is that and things of like common defense, sharing threat intelligence, and other types of things, right? Is that how we can work together against our common attackers? What I mean by that is we have various communities like the Teammate Village, right? Also, we're a member of IT ISAC, right? And somebody the FS ISAC one, but I'm a member of the IT ISAC, this SaaS Special Interest Group, right? We share threats, we share threat intelligence, we share IOCs, right? We share alerts and coming together because we have common threats. If they come after one of us, they're likely going to go after the others. And if we work together, we have a much stronger defense. And I think that's how we build that as a community, how we build that as an industry. I think are very, very important because that makes everyone safer, makes it really makes it much harder for the attackers. And I think that's more than anything else, right? We may be competitive on some outlets, but let's not compete, right,
Yeah.
on these attacks. Let's compete on product differentiation, and with that, we stand behind and support each other when we have industry attacks that are coming after all of us.
Amen. I mean, we kind of touched on that, Chris and I, on one of the WTFs. I mean, we have some catching up to do for sure. So I appreciate that answer. That to me, the shared defense is super powerful. Um, before we head into one of my favorite segments, which is the shit list,
Mhm.
I do want to top off this line of questioning, which is huh, line of questioning. It sounds like you're being interrogated, but no. But what are there any differences or anomalies right now in the cloud security market that we could, you know,
Mm.
take a look at to potentially stand out?
Well, a couple of things certainly is as we're recording this. Actually, we're just about to release a paper like the ITISAC, our SaaS say we're kind of like secure by default, secure by design, right? Because that there's a lot of people they're still doing things out there that are you really thinking about things are secure by design, secure by default, right? And I know everyone talks about that, just like Ann Johnson, from Microsoft, and the podcast she does is like MFA, everybody, but everybody MFA, multi-factor, must be mandatory everywhere, right? Everybody, even though we keep hearing it, we're tired of hearing about it. We've got to have these things mandatory everywhere. And I think that's still an ongoing thing. I could say all clouds, my past 15 years, what's the number one attack? A user's been phished. They were not using MFA, right? Number one,
Mhm.
again and again and again. So sorry to keep ranting on that one, but I want to.
No, not at all.
Another element uh, I think of is how we do more of customers of collecting logs, analyzing logs, and those type of things, right? Is that not everyone uh, thinks about as they move to the cloud, who is in control of the logs. So the SaaS and providers and cloud providers do lots of things, but then it's not completely okay. I do nothing. I just get the application. And I think it's one of the things I talked about RSA and others is that companies need help, and sometimes they may need other vendors to help them with that. And I think there's some great ones. So I know one that is helping a lot of companies like Mitiga, right? Is helping customers that say you got SaaS service, but they don't have the expertise in the cloud or how to manage the logs or analyze them. Well, use a vendor to help them with that.
I love it. I love it. All right, let's shift into the shit list. What's the worst thing you've experienced from a vendor? Go.
The worst thing I experienced from a vendor, I'm gonna say, well, I haven't been doxxed. I'm gonna jinx myself here, right? Uh, the worst thing is that this is the one, my favorite one, sorry, is that yes, I block them from my phone, I block them on my mobile, right? What they do, they call the company's operator and ask them to look up my name to reach my corporate phone. They realize that, well, they can't tell it's me because it's just coming from the corporate operator number. I'm like, ew. Oh, I mean, like bad word, but man, they never give a
You're allowed to curse on this podcast. I mean, have you seen what the fuck did I just read?
Yeah, it's just, oh my gosh. But sometimes you gotta laugh like, oh, they were clever, good on that. But then, like, how do I block it? So pretty much now I get to the point of like, okay, the operator's calling me. It's a vendor. It's nobody inside the company.
Mhm. What's the alternative? Like, what's the best way to approach you?
Well, I think the element is I think of how they make themselves available to know that there's to I think like Sage Tap, right? They're doing things like that, saying, "Hey, you make yourself easily available in an anonymous way, right?" It's like, great. If I want to learn about that, I can do it in a safe way, an easy way, right? but just don't come knocking on my door, right? Because you pretty much, I think they don't realize sometimes is that like the CISO community, we're a community, right? And you
Mhm.
really do something bad to us, we're going to share with our peers that you're not the one to deal with. And I think word of mouth can
Mm.
spread pretty quickly and not just on social media.
Oh, yeah, 100%. We have 55 episodes attesting to that for sure.
Mhm.
Well, let's flip it on its head. What's one thing a vendor has done that's made you feel good? What worked for you?
Well, I think there's an element is that of how they, I think the thing I like the most is they understand your business, right? They really want to understand what your problem is as a pain point. Because I think about to our customers is like, I want to know what is their pain point. What is their business? How can I help them make their business successful? So I do the research to understand them, right? And there's a vendor that says they have no clue that, oh yeah, let's have Windows Defender running in your cloud. Like, we don't use Windows Server. You're useless, right? Don't talk about that, right? So that's maybe one of the best practices I always like to give.
Well, how do people go about doing that? What's the best way to research in your opinion?
Well, I think there's an element on. I think there's an element. There's a lot of good communities out there, right? I think of. I don't want to mention. There's sometimes they're mixed stories. There's Gartner Vanta, the Cyber Risk Alliance, right? There's the conferences and things like that. Is that you can find people and connect with them, and that's opportunities. But do the research, reach out, but just don't cold call people.
Mm, yeah, 100%. I love this. I mean, we breezed through it, but we have so much great information here that I'm so excited to unpack in the distillation of this podcast episode. David, we're towards the end of the session now. Before we sign off, is there anything that you want to impart on the audience today?
The last thing I'm gonna say outside of, hey, you can tell I'm a world traveler. I met some of your other guests like Chris Roberts. Check out my blog,
Yeah, yeah.
davidcrosstravels.com. But the one thing is, if I could say, I always like to end is, I'm a veteran, right? And like many in the community. And one of the things I really like to promote is that there's a cybersecurity talent gap, right? And there's a lot of people out there. And one of the things I really like to encourage lots of companies is look at the veteran community, right? That they come with a lot of principles: honesty, integrity, passion, willing to learn. They know how to operate under fire, right? And a lot of times you're trying to bring in talent, especially some of the junior positions, your SOC and things like that. The military veterans can be some of the best people to bring in. They could bring in so much to your company. And I really like to promote that and share that.
I love that. We're going to drop links in the show notes of this episode. David, it has been an absolute pleasure. You are always welcome to the show.
Let's get it scheduled the next one. I really like, I love to do it. I've been following you in kind of your podcast. They're very, they're really kind of dynamic and fun. So I'm really kind of honored that I could be part of this one.
Oh man, I'm honored that, I'm flattered. That you've been listening and the feedback is absolutely valuable to me. So thank you again. And thanks to all our listeners. We appreciate you. This has been another episode of Audience First. We are out.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Audience First. If you like what you've heard, feel free to follow or subscribe to Audience First on Apple, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast streamers.